According to Eddie Van Halen, he got the idea of tapping watching Jimmy Page do his Heartbreaker solo back in 1971. This story sounds pretty fishy because if Eddie got the idea in 1971, then why he added the tapping part into Eruption only in 1977 and not earlier? Well, Eddie is notorious for not wanting to share his technique and keeping them in secret. When Randy Rhoads asked him how he was able to keep his guitar in tune without a locking nut for his tremolo, Eddie refused to tell him, saying that it was his own secret.
Need any more, And people go, well, what's that? What's that? And I'm going, secret. It's not even hooked up. It does nothing.
So, Eddie Van Halen used to lie about his equipment, techniques, and even about his age, and later he admitted that. In the interview with Esquire, Eddie Van Halen admitted that he lied about his Marshall amp. He explained that David Lee Roth told him to do so. You gotta make up shit. You gotta keep it interesting. All that Dave told me, Eddie said. Did you lie to guitar player? Esquire asked. Eddie explained, wait. What I was getting at was when I did my first interview, I told people the complete opposite. I told them I raised it up to 140 volts. I felt so bad. I felt so horrible, man. They said, please don't attempt what Eddie Van Halen said in the last interview, because everyone was blowing up their amps. Everyone fried their amps because of me. I felt so bad. So that proves that Eddie made up stories to keep it interesting for the fans and to disguise his influences. Of course, many guitarists played tapping on guitar before Eddie. There is a classical guitar piece, Fantasia, written by Celedonio Romero from the mid-1920s that contains a tapping section. The oldest recording of tapping is footage of Roy Smeck tapping on a ukulele from the mid-1930s. Roy, or Leroy Smeck, born 1900, passed away in 94, was an American musician. His skill on the banjo, guitar, and ukulele earned him the nickname the Wizard of Strings.
Only in place of the grapefruit, I give you Roy Smith, radio wizard of the screen.
But
now, if you'll
I
just
really-
step over here, I know, but I'm sure you like Roy because, he is radio's sensation just now.
Oh, boy. It's very nice indeed.
Lady, you ain't seen nothing.
There's actually a video of Roy Smeck on YouTube with the title Eddie Van Halen's Dad, and many believe that it's Ed's dad playing tapping on a ukulele in the video, but of course it was a joke. It's Roy Smeck. Ed's dad, Jan Van Halen, played brass and wind instruments as opposed to string ones, and also plays the solo on Big Bad Bill is Sweet William Now, on a Van Halen song there. Italian radiologist Vittorio Camaradesi played some tapping pieces live on Italian TV in the mid-1960s, including a demonstration of a fast tapping skill across multiple strings on a classical guitar. Some people claim that the Italian classical violinist and composer Nicola Paganini, born 1782, died 1840, tapped on violin, which is false. Paganini never really used right hand on the fingerboard of his violin. The way violin works, that kind of tap wouldn't make much sound and really wouldn't be useful as a performance technique. What Paganini did was pioneer a really aggressive left-hand slur technique with snapping pizzicato-like pull-offs, using multiple left-handed fingers to open strings. This can be heard in one of the variations of his 24th Caprice, but pizzicato is not tapping. One important factor here is that the inherent amplification and compression of electric guitar really helped make tapping a viable technique, and in the early and mid-70s, rock guitar players started using two-handed tapping in their playing. Harvey Mandel was one of the first rock guitar players to tap. According to Richie Blackmore, the first tapping player he saw was Harvey Mandel at the Whiskey A Go Go here on Sunset in Hollywood, 1968. Van Halen's contemporary George Lynch said that he and Van Halen saw Mandel perform live with tapping in Los Angeles in the mid-70s, and Van Halen adopted the technique from Mandel. Steve Hackett of Genesis recorded one track, Return of the Giant Hogweed, with Van Halen-like one-string triplet tapping in the early 70s. Way back in 1973, ZZ Top guitarist Billy Gibbons tapped on guitar, and it's in the solo to the song Beer Drinkers and Hellraisers. In 1975, Kiss guitarist Ace Frehley did pull-offs like Jimmy Page. Plus, he added a bit of tapping to it, which was a cool trick. Brian May used to do that before Eddie. He used the tapping technique on Queen's 1977 track, It's Late. And Brian May got the technique from the guy who got the technique from Billy Gibbons. Joe Satriani says that he knew what the two-handed tapping was, and he could tap on guitar before he ever heard Eddie Van Halen's Eruption. According to Satch, he first saw the technique on TV in 1973. It was Wishbone Ash at the Don Kirshner's rock show. So, from whom did Eddie learn the two-handed tapping technique? Actually, guitarist Terry Kilgore and Eddie Van Halen were both from Pasadena, California. They were friends, and there was a competition between the two in the mid-70s. Actually, Terry played with David Lee Roth in the band called Red Ball Jet in the early 70s. That was the band Dave formed after the Van Halen brothers turned him down the first time. The story goes that Eddie learned tricks from Terry, and the finger tap was one of them. Terry learned the technique from Harvey Mandel in 1974 or 75, and he was doing that as one of the lessons. And about a month later, Eddie was doing it on guitar. On July 6, 2015, Eddie Van Halen said to Guitar World, "A really good friend of mine named Terry Kilgore and I were the so-called gunslingers in Pasadena back in the mid-70s. We jammed together and we would trade licks and have a lot of fun." People who know Terry and talk to him say that Terry told them that he'd show Eddie some tapping, and after that, Eddie started doing it. In the 90s, Terry Kilgore played guitar on two David Lee Roth records, Your Filthy Little Mouth and the David Lee Roth Band. And he toured with Roth during that era. So this is how Eddie Van Halen learned the tapping technique. Of course, many guitarists played a bit of tapping before Eddie Van Halen, but no one sounded like Eddie before him. He revolutionized the technique and made it mainstream.